Hi everyone, this is Koinzell here, and I finally have the weapon comparison ready for you guys. But unfortunately, I don't have the time to do like a lot of weapons, so we are mainly going to look at 4 weapons with additional permutation for one of them. Okay, so the format and the comparison format itself is similar to all the different weapon comparison I've done for all the previous characters. But for the benefit of people who are looking at this for the first time, or if you need a refresher, let me just quickly guide you guys on how to understand the table. Okay, just a very fast one. So you see here we have 2 weapons. We have Tule, which is his signature weapon, Tule Tula. I'm just going to call it Tule for short. And you have Lost Prayer here. So this description here says Tule R1 versus. What this means is that this is Tule R1 versus R1 Lost Prayers. This is the percentage figure. So if you see a positive figure, it means that Tule is performing better than Lost Prayer by this percentage, 8.8% at C0, R1, R1. Okay, but if you go to R5, this is Tule R1, remember? So it's R5 Lost Prayer figures versus R1 Tule. And you see at C0, Tule is still better by 1.5%, but C1 plus, Lost Prayer R5 is better. Okay, so that's how you read the table. Likewise, it goes and follows accordingly. Okay, so take for example, Lost Solar Upper here. You have Tule R1 versus, you have Lost Prayer R1, and you have N2C Lost Prayer. I'll talk more later about what is N2C Lost Prayer. Basically, it's just changing the rotation from spamming N3s to spamming N2Cs. Alright, and obviously we have Dodoco Tales here for comparison as well. Now, no worries about the percentage figures. I will do a freeze on the screen later for you guys to look at the figures. Okay. And obviously we did the 3 categories I've been talking about in my previous math guides, where you have the C0 Farazan with a level 9 Q on her, and the other 2 teammates are Bennett and Layla. Second category will be C6 Farazan level 12 Q and C6 Farazan level 12 Q with FS on Layla instead of Favonius. So more buffs. Alright. Okay, now let me quickly go through the important notes, and then we will talk about each of the weapon and the N2C Lost Prayer as a additional option as well. And then we go into the conclusion. In the conclusion, I'll try to talk a bit more about other weapons as well, since I know that this is shorter than my usual comparison per se. Lesser weapons. Okay, so first off, ER values matches whatever has been covered in Wanderer Math Guide 2.1, which is basically 128 ER, which is covered by the base artifact rows for Wanderer, and 100 ER if you have C6 Farazan. If you're using 4 Shime, then yes, you need 128 ER with C6 Farazan. Otherwise, don't bother with 4 Shime because you're not going to have the energy upkeep to maintain the effect. Unless you want to skip his Q, which is not a good idea. Okay? Now, we are using 4 DPC here with Attack Sense, Damage Goblet, and Crit Damage Circlet. Or Crit Circlet, whichever is the case that you need to use. And obviously, we have Crit Substats. So that's being compared here across all the weapons because that's the best artifact condition for Wanderer. The artifact differences in Wanderer Math Guide 3 more or less remains the same across weapons. Okay? So refer to the Wanderer Math Guide 3 if you want to know the artifact differences. It more or less applies throughout the weapons, with some slight variation here and there, but overall conclusion is pretty much the same. Now the comparison here is done based on the Pyro Cryo comp to maximize the 2 best buffs from his A1 passive, which is why we have Banner and Layla. Now, for weapons that use N2C instead of N3, it's assumed that the attack speed bonuses from C1 Plus and 40PC are less utilized. Because we're talking about like 5 to 6 charge attacks not getting attack speed buff versus 5 to 6 of the third normal attack getting the buff. So it kind of adds up in terms of the attack speed bonuses. Because if you don't already know, the attack speed bonuses, unless it specifically says that it increases charge attack speed, it will always only increase normal attacks. So for those weapons that are using N2C, I will assume that the overall total number of attacks are slightly lower. Okay, so to give an example, right? Let's say we have a rotation with an extra N1, N2. For example, you have 5 N3 with 1 N1, N2. Just an example, okay? In that kind of scenario, in the same rotation, if you're using N2C instead of N3, I will assume that it's only 5 N3 plus 1 N1. No N2, we drop the N2. That's the impact of the attack speed bonus not being utilized on the charge attacks. That is how we are doing the assumption here. Okay, so please take that bear this in mind. Now, since Dodoco Tales is a F2P event weapon, I am only including its R5 figures, no R1 figures. Okay, only makes sense to include R1 figures. Most people should have the R5. If you already do have a Dodoco Tales, especially if you leveled your Dodoco Tales to level 90, right? Now, R1 of 5-star weapons will be compared against both R1 and R5 of 3-star and 4-star weapons, standard stuff, okay? I always do this across all my weapon comparison across all characters. Now, something slightly different. R1 of signature weapon will be compared against both R1 and R5 of the 5-star weapons on standard banner. Since it has been 2+ years, right? So I'm gonna assume that people have gradually accumulated their weapons, be it losing 50-50 on the weapon banner or just getting 5-star weapons on the standard banner, yeah? Now, of course, not everyone will have R5, right? And I understand that, which is why I also compare the R1. Okay? So the R1 and R5 of 5-star weapons on standard banner will be compared against the signature weapon, R1 the signature weapon. So standard banner weapons will be like Lost Prayer, Skyward Atlas. And if you're not talking about Catalyst, then you know you have a whole lot other options, but basically the Skyward series and a few other weapons here and there, like Amos Bow, Lost Prayers, right? These are the non-Skyward series, but still on the standard banner. Now, any weapons that are excluded are likely because I don't think that they perform that well for this character, example Wizard or Skyward Atlas, or they are underutilized for this character, example Kagura's, and slash or time constraint, example Blackcliff. Don't worry about it, I'll talk more about the weapon, these weapons briefly in the conclusion later. So these are all the important notes I would like you guys to bear in mind when looking through the information that will be presented to you guys in terms of the comparison. Alright, so first of all, let's go dive right in and talk about Lost Prayer. Lost Prayer actually provides higher CV than his signature weapon and the loss of some base attack, which is standard stuff, right? In terms of the attack and CV ratio. Now, with the cryo effect from his A1 passive giving you 20 CR, plus his CR Ascension stack giving you 19.4 or 19.2, I can't remember exactly, plus the Lost Prayer CR stats, because Lost Prayer has like 33.1 CR, right? So all of these added together, it's actually very easy to achieve 100 CR on Wanderer, while still having more than 200 crit damage. Okay, and maybe I should add this. While still having more than 200 CD. All you need are 5 base rolls on his artifacts and 2 upgrades. Yeah, that's all. That's all you need. So it's very, very easy to achieve this. So I'll say performance of Lost Prayer is pretty good, with R1 Lost Prayer ranging from 3 to 9% behind, depending on constellations and whether you have CC Faruzan or Freedom Zone, etc. But anyway, the 3 to 9% range is there. Okay? So it's not too bad, right? I mean, it's only 3 to 9% behind the signature weapon, the R1 Lost Prayer. And if you have R5 Lost Prayer, acclimated gradually over time, it's actually only 1 to 1.5% behind R1 Tule, the signature weapon, at C0, and it's in fact better than R1 Tule at C1 plus by 0 to 2%. So R5 Lost Prayers at C1 plus is better than the signature weapon. And this is with a 10-second E duration. So in other words, we actually never get to utilize his Lost Prayer 4th stack, right? Unless you're still using him to do normal attacks after his E ends, which I don't advise it because you should go on to repeat your rotation. And it's only half utilized before C6. Sorry, at C6. Only half utilized at C6 with Hydro. Yeah, typo there. So like I said, yeah, doing Hydro plus C6 can help you utilize the Lost Prayer effect more and make the difference versus R1 to even better. But just bear in mind that the Pyro Cryo are also both well utilized too, because especially since we achieve 100 CR with Cryo, right? Okay, I think I know what I wanted to say here. Sorry, yeah, I'm still sick. I'm still coughing. Only half utilized before C6, and that's the 3rd stack. Okay, 10 seconds, right? So 3rd stack only has 2 seconds. Now, to be honest, given how good C6 Faruzan is, providing like a 13 to 14% boost for Wanderer versus a C0 Faruzan, and this is excluding the procs, just the 40% crit damage. Haven't talked about the utility of the pulse, right? Every 3 seconds. So if you have Lost Prayer, even if it's R1, I would say skip the signature weapon and try for C6 Faruzan. Right? Because you are only 3 to 9% even if you have R1 Lost Prayer. But C6 Faruzan gives you 13 to 14% boost. Although it's a lot more costly, for sure. Okay, depends on your luck. Might not be costly, might be costly. The variance is just too big for me to give like a accurate judge per se. But generally speaking, by the time you get a C6 character, you should have like C2 of the rate up 5-star character. Generally speaking. If you have R5 loss per year, congrats, because it's actually slightly better than his R1 Tule. So for me personally, I'm going to skip signature weapon for the first time in a long while and use R5 loss per year. The last time I skipped should be Kokomi's Donut. Yeah, so it's more than a year ago. I've been pulling on the signature weapon, but mostly just R1s. I could have just said always R1 if I didn't pull for R5 Nilou weapon, but the EM buff team buff is just really good. Okay. Now, this is Lost Prayer using an N3 combo. Let's talk about Lost Prayer with N2C combo, just to compare the N2C versus N3 rotation. But even N3 itself, I can tell you guys, yeah, go for Lost Prayer if you already have it. Go for, yeah, your priority should go into C6 Faruzan more. Now, since Lost Prayer damage bonuses is elemental, not tied to normal attack, I have included a N2C rotation too, because you know only his signature weapon buffs mainly only the normal attacks, right? The 4 DPC effect works on charge attack as well, and the rest of the elemental damage bonuses from Faruzan all work on the charge attacks too. So I can tell you guys, basically, N3 is better than N2C at C0 and C6. Oh wait, sorry, I should have shown the Lost Prayer figures, right? Yeah. So like I said, right, you know, you have a 3 to 6% difference ranging throughout the different 3 categories, 3 to 9% difference, sorry, when it's R1 versus R1. When you have R1 Lost Prayer versus R1 signature weapon, yeah, C0 R5 Lost Prayer is still slightly worse, but it's better from C1 plus. And the same repeats itself regardless of which category it is. Okay? Yeah. If I look at N2C, right? If you look at N2C here, you see that we also have a very, very interesting result. We have N2C have a Lost Prayer, except C6, because obviously C6 you should use N3, not N2C. And this is the N3 Lost Prayer. So what you see here is C0, N3 is better, C1 plus, N2C is better. But it's a very, very small percentage, right? It's about 1% basically throughout the different categories. And C6 is always the same because it's N3. Even if I'm talking about N2C, right? If you have C6, it's always N3. Okay, don't even need to think about N2C. Yeah. All right. So like I said, the difference between the two is within 1%. So it's really not that important, but at least now you know. Okay. One thing though is that I have assumed slightly lower total number of attacks on N2C, right? Because attack speed doesn't work on charge attack unless specified. But let's put aside that. Let's take into consideration how easy it is to spend normal attacks versus like a little bit of difficulty in ensuring there's no time wasted on charging the charge attack. Because sometimes it can happen. If you don't charge it fast enough, there can be a slight delay, but it's a very, very small delay. The only thing is that if it adds up across 5 to 6 charge attacks, then it may result in you having even lesser normal attacks. That's what I'm trying to say here. Okay, I'm not saying that it's difficult to charge a charge attack without delay, but it does require a little more effort than just spamming normal attack, right? Because spamming normal attack is just like just mash the button. Whereas when you do N2C, you need to be mindful of the combo that you're doing. Sometimes you may mess up. You didn't end up doing N2C, maybe you end up doing N1C, for example. Stuff like that. Of course, that's a skill level issue, but I'm just saying that it's a lot easier to just spam normal attacks. And let's say if there's some mistakes that happen through the N2C combo, you will end up having even lesser attacks than what I'm assuming here. That's the main gist I'm talking about. So ultimately, I'll say go for N3 on Lost Prayer for C0 and C6. For C1 to C5, whether you want N3 or N2C really depends on your skill level. But to be honest, given the 1% difference, I'll just spam normal attacks. Make your life easier, just spam normal attacks. But feel free to go N2C on C1 to C5 if you prefer. Like maybe you find spamming normal attacks boring, you want to do N2C, you find you get joy out of pulling off perfect N2Cs throughout the rotation, you know, go for it. You do you. But at least you know the percentage differences involved here. Okay? Next, let's talk about Solar Pearl. So Solar Pearl is a good battle pass weapon, right? It's a low spender weapon as well. That's also the reason why I'm looking at it next. Unfortunately though, for Solar Pearl, we can only get 6 seconds worth of buff down on your normal attacks because you can't use his E again while in mid-air, and Q ends his E stance. So the way to refresh the normal attack buff on Solar Pearl is to either use your E or Q, which you can't for Wanderer. But even with that, right, you can see that R1 Solar Pearl is actually not too bad because it's ranging from 17 to 23% behind Thule at R1 and 12 to 15% behind Lost Prayer. Okay, so we're talking about Solar Pearl here. So this is what I'm saying, right? You have about 17 to 23% when you're talking about R1 versus R1. Even if it's a different category, more or less holds within the range of comparison I'm talking about. Now, against Lost Prayer, it does do slightly better. You know, you have like a difference of like 11 to 14% thereabout. But once you have a R5 Solar Pearl, obviously it gets a lot more closer to the Lost Prayer. Not as close to the Thule. Still this level of difference. So let me just quickly talk about what it means in terms of like the tier differences. So generally speaking, if you have a R1 Solar Pearl, it's 1 to 1.2 tiers behind a Thule, while 0.75 tier behind a Lost Prayer. R5 Solar Pearl though is 0.75 to 1 tier behind R1 Thule, and 0.4 to 0.5 tier behind Lost Prayer. So it's actually pretty decent for a low spender weapon. And I have to say, you have performed much better if you can utilize more than 6 seconds. But unfortunately, we just can't for Wanderer. Yeah, we can't. Alright. So that's Solar Pearl. It's not too bad for a 4-star weapon, being only 1 to 1.2 tier behind. Pretty standard, right? And at R5 at least it's 0.75 to 1 tier behind, so that's nice. Now let's talk about Dodoco Tales, right? This is a fully F2P weapon, and I can very confidently say that this is quite easily one of the best F2P event weapons so far. Especially as a fully F2P option, R5 Dodoco Tales performance is actually decent for Wanderer 2. Now, although I say all this, just bear in mind that it's obviously the worst weapon in this comparison, right? Because this is the only F2P weapon in this comparison, so yeah, it's fair for it to be the worst per se. But it's actually pretty good because it's still actually better than R1 Solar Pearl at C0 by 0 to 2%. At C1 Plus though, then Solar Pearl starts to be better than Dodoco Tales by approximately 3%. And this is the figure I'm talking about. You see here, Solar Pearl is actually worse off at C0 than R5 Dodoco Tales. Obviously, this is R1 Solar Pearl. Okay, so R1 Solar Pearl worse than R5 Dodoco Tales at C0. At C1 Plus, generally speaking, it's about a 3% difference in favor of Solar Pearl. R1. Obviously, if you have R5 Solar Pearl, then it gets better. Yeah. And you'll notice that C6 is pretty big, and I'll talk about that later. The difference is bigger. Then that's a big jump in difference, right? Yeah, I'll talk about that later. So across all the different categories you see, in fact, at the highest category, you'll see that with the C6 Faruzan and a Freedom Sword on Layla, you'll see that C0 pretty much is the same. Like a 0.3% difference, I can pretty much say that the two weapons are the same between the R1 Solar Pearl and R5 Dodoco Tales. So if we go back to the text here, the analysis here, R5 Dodoco Tales is basically 1.5 tier behind R1 Thule. I'll say it's good rather than decent if it was 1 tier. But considering it's fully F2P, I'll say it's still decent. Especially considering C6 Faruzan's importance in terms of wish resources, right? Like, if using Dodoco Tales allows you to go through do for more pulls for Faruzan, then it is a no-brainer to go for the Faruzan rather than the weapon banner. Now, against R1 Lost Prayer is about 0.7 to 1 tier behind. So this is why the reason why I also say that Lost Prayer is actually very good for Wanderer. Because it's also giving a decent lead over the other 4-star weapons while performing very close to the signature weapon. And even more so if you have R5 Lost Prayer. Now the gap at C6 does increase a lot because I'm using N2C rotation, right? And I'm using N2C even at C6 for Dodoco Tales. Why? Because Dodoco Tales promotes the usage of charge attacks. It's the way that weapon works. And I can tell you using N3 is better for C6, but it's not a lot more better because of the way Dodoco Tales work. But I wanted to show that forcing N2C on him at C6 with Dodoco Tales is bad. Which is why I did it. The figure is N2C and you see that the percentage difference is increased quite a fair bit at C6, yeah? Now, the other thing is also because if you have C6, I'm pretty sure you have a better weapon than Dodoco Tales, right? For Wanderer. You should have. Okay? I think it's a fair assumption on my part to assume that if you have C6 Wanderer, you should have a better weapon than Dodoco Tales for him. Now, there may be some outlier cases, but yeah, generally speaking, you should have. Oh, and obviously if you're using like Yunji in the comp, Dodoco Tales is a very bad option because her buffs doesn't work on charge attack. Be it her Q buff or her Constellation buffs. If I didn't wrongly, the Constellation buff that gives normal attack damage bonus as well as attack speed all only works on normal attack. Okay? So if you use Yunji in the comp, don't use Dodoco Tales. My particular comp here with Bennett and Layla, there's no issue with using Dodoco Tales. Like even if you have C4 Layla effect still procs based on charge attacks, not just normal attacks. So it still works. Not that I have C4 Layla anyway, but yep. Alright, so that brings me to the conclusion. I've covered all the weapons that I wanted to cover today. I know it doesn't look a lot, but I can tell you because of how Wanderer works and because of how some of the weapons here work, it actually cost me quite a bit of time to do the math, especially Lost Prayers. Lost Prayer. Oh my god, every 4 seconds the damage bonus changes, so I have to tally the different how many number of normal attacks we can do in the first 4 seconds, and then the second 4 seconds, and then the last 2-second block. So yeah, that's the reason why considerable time has been spent on this to produce this weapon comparison, even though it has lesser weapons. It's not like I'm trying to cut short. I can tell you the amount of time I spent maybe even more than some of the other weapon comparison. Okay? Alright, now let's go into the conclusion itself. So first off, the weapon ranking to make things easier for you guys. Obviously R5 Signature the best, R5 Tule, followed by R5 Lost Prayer, followed by R1 Tule, R1 Lost Prayer, R5 Solar Pearl, R1 Solar Pearl, and R5 Dodoco Tales, which is more than equal to R1 Solar Pearl. In fact, it's only more than at C0. At C1 plus R1 Solar Pearl is still better than R5 Dodoco Tales. Okay? Oh, and I guess I could probably say put an equal here, right? Because R5 Lost Prayer, though it's slightly better than R1 Tule, starting from C1 plus, it's still very, very small. It's like a 1 to 2% difference. So it's okay to put a equal sign here. Okay? So, to be honest, given how good C6 Faruzan is, I've mentioned this earlier, but I'm just going to repeat this in the conclusion. Providing a 13 to 40% boost for Wanderer versus a C0 Faruzan, and this is excluding the procs, this is just taking into account the 40% crit damage from her C6. If you have Lost Prayer, even if it's R1, you can just skip the signature weapon and try for C6 Faruzan. That's what I would recommend. Just try for C6 Faruzan, especially if you have Lost Prayer. Wait, sorry, that's sorry, this is from Nahida. This should be out. No wonder I saw the formatting looks a bit weird, sorry. Yeah. So that's for the R5, the 5-star weapons. For 4-star weapon, I will recommend R5 Solar Pearl if you have. Otherwise, R5 Dodoco Tales. Or if R1 Solar Pearl if you have C1 plus. Okay, it's pretty close really between the two. But obviously R5 Solar Pearl is better, which is why we started with R5 Solar Pearl first. Then you have R5 Dodoco Tales. Maybe let me just put here. Or R1 Solar Pearl if C1 plus. Now let's quickly talk about the weapons I've excluded. right? I know every single time I do a weapon comparison video, I will always get tons of questions regarding the weapons that I did not cover. But I can't possibly cover all weapons too. So that's that. So let me just quickly and briefly talk about some of the weapons that are not included in comparison. But these are the weapons I did give some thought to, and I did analyze it later, though not the full math. Although Skyward Atlas, I actually did the math, but I didn't have the time to add into the comparison because it was like after I finished this weapon comparison, then I decided to do Skyward Atlas because I realized that Skyward Atlas was actually very fast, fast and easy to do. Yeah. So anyway, at C0, Skyward is 50k slash 55k, so R1 is 50k, R5 is 55k, and this is the final permutation with the what do you call that? The C6 Horizon and the FS on Layla. So technically speaking, you will have higher than C0 than that. But let me just quickly give you guys an idea of where Skyward stands. Okay. So at R1, it's only slightly better than R1 Solar Pearl. R1 Skyward is only slightly better than R1 Solar Pearl, and slightly worse than R5 Solar Pearl. Which means that it's also only slightly better than Dodoco Tales, right? But Skyward has a better scaling than the 4-star weapons. So at R5, it actually performs a lot better than R5 Solar Pearl and R5 Dodoco Tales, but it's still behind Lost Prayer, right? Because Lost Prayer is like 58k or even 59k. Yeah. So with that, you know that 55k is behind 59k, and that's why it's worse than Lost Prayer. Right? I will attribute it to the fact that the Faruzan doesn't really do anything for Skyward Atlas effect. She's all about animal, and Skyward Atlas effect is physical. Now, in terms of Kagura's variety, basically has the same stats as Lost Prayer. Instead of CR, it's CD, but you have a lower damage bonus from the weapon effect, right? Because you can only get one stat. I don't know how you're gonna get more than one stat when you only have one hit from the E and it goes into a stance. If you end your stance early, I don't think it's enough to get the second hit. So you can't even get the final third hit and third stat to get the final damage bonus as well. So basically you only get one stack. And but to be fair, it's actually very close behind Lost Prayer and very likely better than Skyward. I have not done the math for it, but I'm fairly confident that it will be better than Skyward, but worse than Lost Prayer. Because the damage bonus is lower than Lost Prayer. Right? This is pretty straightforward. But if you have a spare Kagura's variety somehow, it's not a bad option. Right? It's not a bad option. By all means go ahead. But let's say if you have Kagura's variety, but you don't have Skyward, you don't have Lost Prayer, you want to give your Wanderer a 5-star weapon, obviously you can use Kagura's variety. It's just that it irks me to use a weapon and underutilize it with only one stat. That's me. But yeah, it irks me greatly. Okay. So with Sith next, since Wanderer has no EM scaling, I can tell you getting the EM buff is really bad in relative comparison. Even though I know that EM helps with the sword reactions, right? But it's not that great, especially compared to other options like the attack and the damage bonus. And one of the main reason why I excluded with Sith is really because he doesn't gain from the EM buff. That's number one. Number two, the horrible downtime that with Sith has should speak for itself. Okay, once you average out the buff along with its downtime, right? Most of the time with Sith doesn't perform that well. Maybe it's still okay as a 4-star weapon, but for the people who think that it's better than a 5-star weapon, it's only better in certain scenarios in that first 10 seconds. After that, once you even the rotations, you're screwed. You're really screwed. And with Sith, to me, it's always a YouTube showcase video weapon. It's always a YouTube showcase video weapon. You want to do a showcase, you use Sith. Oh, look, we can achieve this amount of damage with a 4-star weapon. But nobody shows you what happens during the downtime, right? So, yeah. Alright, Blackcliff. I actually think that Blackcliff should perform well as a 4-star weapon here, looking at the stats and the effect. I mean, at least the effect, you can get all 3 stats, but it's still very dependent on the opponent, right? If in a single target scenario, you can't even get 1 stat. So this is always this is a typical problem with Blackcliff per se. But in terms of the stats, I think it's not too bad as a 4-star weapon, but I don't have the time to do the math to be sure. Because I really need to focus on doing the other com guides. And com guides are the ones that take me the most time. So after we are done with the com guides, and if time permits, I would add on these weapons to the comparison above. But otherwise, you should this should help you understand why I've excluded them, be it time constraint or the weapon not being fully utilized or the weapon actually being bad, etc. But I hope the analysis here is helpful to you guys. I mean, I pretty much already told you guys the ranking, right? With Skyward Atlas placed in and Kagura's placed in, how it looks like. Alright, so finally, a look at the percentage figures for you guys to pause and refer if required. Alright. So here you have the Childe with Lost Prayer, N3 and N2C Lost Prayer. In the same screen, we can see Solapa as well, with comparison of against the 3 permutations before it. So you have the C0 to C0 Firuzan with Land 9Q permutation with R1 and R5 here. Okay, these are the percentage figures. I already talked about how to read them, how to understand the table. So this is the C0 Firuzan. Then you have C6 Firuzan here, this section, C6 Firuzan, okay. And then you have C6 Firuzan with Freedom Swan on Layla, which is these figures here. So yeah, feel free to pause at any given time. Okay, these are all the figures that I have for you guys. Now let's look at a Dodoco Tales. Now Dodoco Tales, remember, is always R5 figure. There's no R1 figure for Dodoco Tales. And these are the 4 permutations that is being compared against: the signature weapon, the Lost Prayer, N3, and the N2C, as well as Solapa. So these are the percentage figures. Okay. So like guys, again, this is the C0 Firuzan. You have the C6 Firuzan over here, and the C6 Firuzan with LFS here. So pause as required. Alright, let me move on to the final part of this video, which is just talking about what's coming next. It's pretty straightforward. We've completed the weapon comparison now. I know it's not the usual amount of weapons that I usually do, but yeah, time constraint. So one, not to mention the effort taken is pretty much the same actually. So Wanderer Hypercarry Com variants, that's something else that's on the pipeline that I want to do. Other than Hypercarry, I also don't mind putting in like Hydro character, you know, so that we see how it works with like a high talent damage sub DPS rather than all the damage being concentrated on Wanderer per se. Possible too. But yeah, again, like I always say, as long as time permits, because we still have slightly over a week left. That's all. That's the amount of time I have left. I also need to do the Constellation Refinement comparison video regardless of how the progress of the comp videos are. So yep, let's see how that goes. You guys can also ask me, you can still ask me about other weapons, and if there are some weapons that do make sense to be compared, I will try to put them in. Like for example, my Barman with the EM subset is a bit painful to use it, to be honest. So that's how I'm assessing like which weapons to include in the weapon comparison. It has to be weapons that are like clear cut good, or weapons that are clear that it's not that great, then you know I don't really want to include them in. Yeah. I mean like Dodoco Tales should perform better than Mepame. Okay, so anyway, I hope the content has been helpful to you guys. If you like the content, remember the video and click subscribe for more. Thanks everyone for watching. Bye.